Hey guys, in this section, we're going to take a look at functions in Kotlin. So functions you would define in Kotlin to do some piece of work. You would put in your business logic. A clue, when you have repeated lines of code, you would enclose them in functions and you call the functions instead of having more lines of code. In the Kotlin ecosystem, functions are first-class citizens, which means they can exist by themselves. You can pass arguments as a function type, which I'll show you in the Lambda section. So let's create a function called say hello. Your function can take in arguments and they can also return a value. So in this case, we're going to give it an input of type string. So we're going to define the argument name and the type will be string. And you don't have to return anything. So if you don't return anything, it is under the hoods, it looks like this. It returns a type called unit. So unit does nothing. It's just type, which is essentially, it just exists and it's under the hood. So let us go ahead and print the name here with the greeting. Hello, and then let's use the dollar operator, and there you go. And the way you would call a function if they exist inside a class, you would use the dot operator on the instance of the class. However, they exist all by themselves, then you just call it just like calling a local function from another function. And let's do a say hello here with the name. Let's go ahead and run this. You can also give your function variable number of arguments, and you can use the keyword for that. So let's create a function which takes a variable argument, and we will call this my cool function. And we're not going to return any type from this. We are going to give it a parameter of variable number of arguments using the var keyword, and this will call at input. And this we'll call input, which will be of type string. And what we're going to do is, since this is a variable number of arguments, we are going to go ahead and print it using the map lambda. And let's call this function with some values in it. So we'll give it some name. And you can put in as many strings in here as possible, and then let's go ahead and run this. So essentially this is a function which takes a variable number of arguments, which is like multiple. It could be a collection extracted from a collection or something like that. However, here we have defined it as of type string. We can also define it of type T, which is generic. So let's make it generic so that I can send in other types as well. And in order to make this generic, you'll have to define the type in front of the function name like this. And here I can send in any parameters. It could be an object type, which would have a toString method. And I can also send in integers. So let's send in a few integers in here. And that's pretty much it. Functions can have named parameters in Kotlin. So let's say I am sending in two parameters in here, with one being the name, the other one being a greeting of type string. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to define the type as string. And here we're just going to make the greeting, call the name, just like that. And what we're going to do is we're just going to call say hello with a name and the greeting. Let's go ahead and run this. So as you can see, IntelliJ prompts you with a hint saying that this is name and this is greeting. However, if you do not care about the order, you can just use the named parameter. And the order does not have to be important. You can keep the greeting in front of it. And that'll work just fine. Now, if I remove a greeting from here, the compiler is going to complain that there's no function which takes in just a specific string. So in order to fix this, there are two ways you can do this. You can make this as nullable and give it a null value. That would be fine. However, if you do not want to do that, because null hello would, that won't make any sense. You can give it a default value while defining the function. It does not have to be nullable. You can remove the nullable type here, and that works just fine. And if you want to override the greeting from default type, you can just send in your value from the function. So Kotlin allows you to create extension functions for classes that you don't necessarily own. So let's say you're using a library of some sort. In this case, for this example, let's take the string class, which is final, and you cannot exactly override functions in a string class to suit your needs, or create new methods in your string class to suit your needs. So let's go ahead and create an extension function for that. So to do that, let's use the keyword fun. And the way you would define an extension function is using the keyword, the type that you're defining it for, and then let's call the function name as say hello. And what we're going to do is we are just going to return a value, hello, and this keyword in this way, in this context, refers to the subject that you're calling the method on. So let's give it a return type of string. So this would refer to whatever you call it on. So for example, I have a name here. So let's go ahead and print ln and then have a name. So this is the string type. And you can call the extension function as if it was part of the string class. So let's go ahead and call say hello, just like that. And when you do this, you are essentially sending an input which refers to as this in this context, and then you are just formatting that as a greeting. You can also give in parameters to your extension function. So let's call this greeting, and which should be of type string, right? And then what we're going to do is we are just going to print the greeting with the name, and then give it your name here, give it your greeting. So we're going to call hi or say hello. So essentially you're giving an input to your extension function, and you're calling the extension function on the type. And this is how you would create an extension. So you can create an extension function for any class. It can be of type integer. It can be of type, any object that you do not own. Next, let's take a look at infix function. In order to understand infix function, let's create an extension function here. And we will create an extension function for the integer class. We will call it add. And what we're going to do is we're going to give it a return type of integer as well, and then call this the input, which will also be of type integer. So we're going to add two integers here, and we're going to do return this plus the input. So what we did here is we just created an extension function add, which we can call on an integer data type, and we can give it an input of the amount or the value that we need to add to it. So let's go ahead and call this function. So let's say 2.add, and then let's give it some value, and let's go ahead and print that. So 2 got added to 3, 2, which in this case refers to the subject as this, plus the input that you added, which is 3. Now, in order to make this as an infix function, you've seen infix function in the for loop where you use the in, which is an infix function. So for a specific value in a collection. So in this case, in order to make this an infix function, all you have to do is define it with the keyword infix, just like that. And the requirement for making this an infix function, that it has to be an extension. It should have one parameter as an input, and it cannot have any variable argument parameters. So, and instead of calling with the dot operator, you can call it with an infix way, just like this. And that works just fine. You'll see infix functions scattered all around in any Kotlin library that you might use. Android has a bunch of them. So feel free to play around with them. They're very powerful. They make code extremely readable. And obviously this code is far from production ready. You need to do some sort of validation, and you could, give in some, inputs which might be nullable and things like that. Essentially, this is what infix functions are, and this is how you can create extension functions with Kotlin.